All right, good morning once again, and I hope our audio is better. Thank you for joining us on the Russian Invasion Special Coverage Program. My name is Ladi Akeridoluale. The headlines. Satellite images show extensive damage and several destroyed Russian warplanes at its Crimea air base. President Volodymyr Zelensky says Ukraine will respond to the Russian shelling of Marinets town. And G7 urges Russia to return control of Zaporizhzhia nuclear plant to Ukraine. It's day 169 of the Russian invasion of Ukraine. Let's begin with a quick rundown of major developments so far this week. On the front lines, Ukraine has accused Russia of firing rockets from the captured Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant, killing at least 13 people and wounding 10 in the knowledge it would be risky for Ukraine to return fire. The governor of the Central Dnipropetrovsk region says Russia launched 80 Grad rockets at the town of Marinets across the Dnipro River from the nuclear power plant yesterday, damaging more than 20 buildings. Two U.S. newspapers have cited unnamed Ukrainian officials as saying the country's special forces had carried out an attack on Tuesday on an airbase on the Russian-annexed Crimean Peninsula, destroying military aircraft. Russian attacks on the eastern Ukrainian city of Bakhmut killed at least 6 people and wounded 3 others, according to its regional governor, Pavlo Kyrylenko. The Russian Ministry of Defense says forces assaulted several Ukraine military targets in Donetsk, including an ammunition depot, and intercepted multiple rockets fired by the U.S.-made high-mobility artillery rocket systems. The General Staff of Ukraine's armed forces said on the same day that Russian troops launched artillery attacks in Kharkiv, Sloviansk, Kramatorsk, and Bakhmut, and the Ukrainian armed forces repelled Russian attacks in Akieva, Sloviansk, and Bakhmut. And recent developments indicate that satellite images appear to show extensive damage and several destroyed Russian warplanes at the Crimean air base following explosions earlier this week. The Saki base in the west of Russian-ruled Crimea was rocked by a string of blasts, killing 1 person on Tuesday. Ukraine had not claimed responsibility, but this new evidence suggests the possibility of a targeted attack. The images from the US-based Planet Labs show large areas of scorched earth left from fires that erupted. The base's main runway seems to be intact, but at least 8 aircraft appear to have been damaged or destroyed, with several craters clearly visible. Most of them are in a specific area of the base where a large number of planes were parked out in the open away from the cover of hangars. The before and after images from Planet Labs, which monitors hundreds of satellite feeds over Ukraine, are the first independent confirmation that the base may have been damaged. Until now, details about the extent of the explosion's impacts have been scarce, but it is still not clear how the base was damaged or by what. And President Volodymyr Zelensky says Ukraine will respond to the Russian shelling of the town of Marinets and to consider how much damage to inflict on Russia as quickly as possible to end the war. Ukraine said 13 people died and 10 were wounded when Russia fired rockets at Marinets from the territory of a nuclear power plant it had captured in the Petrovsk region. The attack, according to Mr. Zelensky, underlines the need for allies to supply more powerful weapons to the Ukrainian military. The war that began with Russian forces invading its neighbor on February the 24th has displaced millions, killed thousands of civilians, and left cities, towns, and villages in ruins. Ukraine and its Western allies have accused Russian forces of targeting civilians and war crimes, charges Russia rejects.
This is the question that everyone is worried about. When will the war end? Some say months, some say a year, some say even more. But the matter of time actually depends directly on the question of the losses suffered by Russia. The more losses the occupiers suffer, the sooner we'll be able to liberate our land and ensure the security of Ukraine. This is what everyone who defends our state and helps Ukraine should think about. how to inflict the greatest possible losses on the occupiers in order to shorten the war. If almost 43,000 dead Russian soldiers do not survive, if almost 43,000 dead Russian soldiers do not convince the Russian leadership that they need to look for a way out of the war, then we need to fight more, with more results to convince.
Heavy fighting has been reported around the eastern Ukrainian town of Pisky as Russia presses on with its campaign to seize all of the industrialized Donbas region. An official with the Russian-backed Donetsk People's Republic claims Pisky on the front lines just 10 kilometers northwest of the provincial capital Donetsk was under the control of Russian and separatist forces. On the instant messaging service Telegram, the official Daniil Besnov said it's hot in Pisky. The town is ours, but there remains scattered pockets of resistance in its north and west. Ukrainian officials have denied that the heavily fortified town, a key to the defense of Donetsk, has fallen. Meanwhile, the head of the self-proclaimed Donetsk People's Republic Territorial Defense says Ukrainian forces have hit an industrial site in the Russian-controlled city, causing a fire and an ammonia leak. The state emergency services of the DPR said in an update that at least one person was killed and 2 were injured following the hit. According to officials, the fire at the brewery is still being extinguished. The state emergency services of the DPR is also warning people to remain indoors. The head of the Russian-backed separatist administration in eastern Ukraine's Donetsk says that a trial of captured personnel from Ukraine's Azov regiment would take place by the end of summer, likely in the city of Mariupol. The Azov Regiment, a unit of Ukraine's National Guard with far-right and ultra-nationalist origins, garnered international attention for its resistance to the Russian siege of Mariupol's vast steelworks. After fighting for weeks from the bunkers and tunnels below the steelworks, hundreds of the Azov fighters surrendered in May to Russian-backed forces. As part of a tour for journalists organized by Russia's defense ministry, the head of the self-proclaimed Donetsk People's Republic, Denis Pushilin, told reporters the first tribunal will take place probably in Mariupol, and it will be organized before the end of summer. Speaking at Donetsk region's Olivka prison, where 53 Ukrainian prisoners of war, including Azov fighters, were killed on July the 29th during shelling that both Ukraine and Russia have blamed each other for, Mr. Pushilin said that a trial in Mariupol would be open to media and to international representatives. Russia regularly cites Azov in support of its assertion that Ukraine is controlled by fascists. Russian state media has compared the Azov fighters to World War II-era Nazis, whose defeat by the Soviet Union remains a core part of Russian national identity. Kiev says Azov has been reformed away from its radical origins and that it has nothing to do with politics. The regiment itself has also distanced itself from the views of its nationalistic founder. Azov denies allegations of fascism, Nazism, and racism and says that Russia spreads disinformation about the regiment. Russia has long considered the defense industry to be one of its most important export successes. But the British Ministry of Defense says that Russia's military-industrial capacity is, quote, under significant strain, and that the credibility of many of its weapon systems have been undermined by the association with Russian forces' poor performance in the Ukrainian war. In its daily brief, the UK also said that Russia will face difficulties in carrying out some export orders for armored fighting vehicles due to Western sanctions and the exceptional demand for vehicles for Russia's own forces in Ukraine. And Ukraine's foreign minister has asked the European Union and G7 countries to stop issuing visas to Russian citizens, citing what he said was their support for the invasion of Ukraine. Dmytro Kuleba tweeted on Wednesday that Russians overwhelmingly support the war in Ukraine. They must be deprived of the right to cross international borders until they learn to respect them. His plea echoed an earlier one by Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelenskyy for Western countries to impose a one-year travel ban on Russians, saying they should be forced to live in their own world until they change their philosophy. Let's talk now to Professor Dennis Soltis of the Department of Administration and International Developments. He joins us from the capital of Kazakhstan, Almaty. Good morning to you, Prof, and thank you for your time this morning. All right, I'm not 100% sure that you can hear me, but let me ask you, what do you make of what is going on the ground in Ukraine? It does seem as if Ukraine itself is now counter-attacking, because now there are double narratives on many fronts. The Zaporizhia plant is said to be used as a base. There was the shelling of the Olenivka prison, and then now there's this Crimea air base, what looks like an attack there. It does seem as if we're having a bit of problem with Professor Soltis, so we'll probably try to get back to him when we can. But coming up after the break, Ukraine's Russia grain deal, the United Nations expects a big uptick in applications for shipments. Please stay on with us. Thanks for staying tuned. Welcome back. The foreign ministers of the group of 7 economic powers have called on Moscow to immediately return Ukraine's embattled Zaporizhia nuclear power plant to full Ukrainian control amidst growing fears of a potential disaster. In a statement which they issued, they said Ukrainian personnel responsible for the operation of the Zaporizhia nuclear power plant must be able to carry out their duties without threats or pressure. The statement adds that it is Russia's continued domination of the nuclear power plant that endangers the region. The plant, which is near the southern city of Enerhodar and is Europe's biggest, has been shelled several times and was partially damaged last weekend. However, critical infrastructure is said to remain intact. Russia and Ukraine blame each other for the attacks. On Russia's initiative, the United Nations Security Council is to address the shelling on Thursday. That's today in New York. The head of the International Atomic Energy Agency, Rafael Grossi, is set to brief the council. The G7 foreign ministers warned that Russia's actions significantly increase the risk of a nuclear incident and put the people of Ukraine, neighboring states, and the world at risk. The Chinese ambassador to Moscow has called the United States, quote, the main instigator of the war in Ukraine, and accused Washington of seeking to crush Russia. Ambassador Zhang Henhui says the U.S. backed Russia into a corner with repeated expansions of the NATO defense alliance and support for forces seeking to align Ukraine with the European Union rather than Moscow. He adds that as the initiator and main instigator of the UN crisis, of the Ukrainian crisis, Washington, while imposing unprecedented comprehensive sanctions on Russia, continues to supply arms and military equipment to Ukraine. According to him, the ultimate goal is to exhaust and crush Russia with a protracted war and the cudgel of sanctions. The ambassador's reasoning closely followed one of Russia's own justifications for its invasion of Ukraine, which has resulted in thousands of deaths and the devastation of entire cities, as well as driving more than a quarter of the population to flee their homes. Let's see if we can talk now to Dr. Bashir Obashikola, Professor of Economics and Chairman of Nigerians in Diaspora Organization in Russia. He joins us from the capital of Moscow. Good morning to you, Prof, and thank you for your time.
Thank you for having me. Good morning.
Let's begin with the grain export deal. It does seem as if, in spite of every other thing that is going on, both on the battlefield and otherwise, it does seem as if that deal is continuing. Ships are leaving and they're going through the usual inspections and heading for different destinations. How optimistic are you that this will stand? And secondly, what kind of economic impact do you think it could have?
Yeah, thank you for having me once again. Of course, that deal of wheat exports is an example of what international cooperation could do when there is unity of purpose. I think despite the war, despite the the economic consequences of it, if there are concerted efforts, things could be done. Maybe peace could even be achieved, soon if the international community actually wants to work together with both sides of the divide. So of course, the economic impact of it is that, of course, receiving countries like Africa and some of the countries who are importing the wheat from Russia and Ukraine, we benefit from it because the prices of goods and services are going up because it has ripple effect on even other services that doesn't even have components of wheat, because of what has been going on. So if it, and I hope and I believe that if the international community wants it to continue, they will continue to put pressure on both sides, because you need to have the two of them, I mean Ukraine and Russia, to continue to observe the conditions of that deal, and for it to happen, the international community must encourage them.
Let's take that a bit further, and you did reference it in your answer just now where you said it's an example of what can be done when there is will in the room and there is a drive for peace. And that brings me to the main issue of the peace talks themselves. Quite a number of people have pointed out that this grain deal is being monitored, supervised and worked on by Russians, Ukrainians, Turks and the United Nations, and that possibly this kind of cooperation and coordination could or should lead to more substantive peace talks. But that hasn't happened so far. I'm wondering what do you make of that, and how can this grain deal move forward and be translated into that, in your view?
Yeah, it's too early. Of course, there are still animosity, between the two sides, and of suspicion and all those stuff. So it's too early to believe that maybe that cannot be translated into further discussions on peace. So let's that's why I say it's very important we encourage them to maintain the terms of this deal, and moving forward, when confidence is built and that trust is built, not only between the two of them, also the controlling agencies and countries like Turkey, and the United Nations, that will build the confidence of Russia to say that okay, it's not being manipulated, because that has already been the problem. Russia believes that they are always being manipulated when discussions or agreements are reached, and they have cited a lot of instances when agreement is reached and you discover that the other side is doing something different. And that also, talks to the issue of NATO expansion, which they were promised not to happen, and it happened. So we need to build confidence, and that will lead to further peace discussion.
The narrative you've just given, of course, has been echoed in many fora by China in particular. In fact, that's one of the stories we're reporting this morning, that the Chinese are still insisting that the other side, as you put it, in this case the United States, is the instigator of this entire crisis, and it comes to what you've just described as promises made and then not complied with, not kept, particularly on the issue of NATO expansion. So there's a trust deficit. The question is, how do we go from the deficit to what could bring about enough trust for the sides to sit down and look at this issue with less blinkered eyes, if we like?
Well, it's unfortunate that United Nations is not, strong enough to actually play the role that is meant to be, which is peacemaking and discussion. Because unfortunately, United Nations is, somehow subjugate to other superpower, and as a result, they cannot assert their authority on, all these issues. But I think what is very important is that other countries, other continents like Africa, like Asia, Middle East, they should also have a voice in, putting pressure on both sides, and even including United States itself, because the issue is that when they say when there was a time somebody was saying, why is it that every time there is a problem in Europe, it becomes international problem? It becomes, even World War started the same way. We're drawn into it. It wasn't our making. We never knew how it happened or what was this all about. The same issue is happening here. The whole world is suffering just because Ukraine and Russia and the United States cannot agree on within themselves on the geopolitics of relationship. And I think it's very important that other continents must have their voice independently, not being influenced or coerced by any other powers. And I think that would be, because when two are fighting, you need to have, a third party that is being trusted by both sides, at least giving some element of trust that would be able to, bring them to table. And that is not happening now, because United States that has the capability as the superpower that could have done this have been seen to have taken side, and it's not even yielding to the fact that, I'm the senior brother here, I need to bring these two to both two sides. Sometimes when people complain, even in a family, you need to have the senior brother or father or mother or uncle that will bring with, okay, you have, maybe you fought each other. You still need to bring you to the table to discuss. After all fight, there's always room for, peace. And I think that should be the role of other international and other continents of the world to actually assert their influence on these people and let the whole world know that they cannot continuously draw us into wars that we don't know the reasons and the interest that these things have been for which this war is being processed.
Let's come to the situation within Russia. Quite a number of people, particularly those who take a look at the analysis of economics and the business environment and so on, have said that Russia has done a marvelous job of staying afloat in spite of the extensive sanctions placed on it by the other side and by players on the other side of this conflict, that has managed to stay afloat. But you are in Russia. You're talking to us this morning from Moscow. Give us an idea of what everyday life is like. Are there shortages? Do you go to the shops and find that foreign goods are not as plentiful as they used to be? And how impactful are those sanctions on day-to-day living? For example, the use of credit cards, which used to be issued by international organizations.
The issue is that all these issues and sanctions, of course, maybe not to this magnitude, have been on since 2014, even earlier. Some are still hangover from the Soviet era, which, of course, some people don't know why should they be, why should some sanctions continue, even though there is no more Soviet Union. Of course, so Russia have gradually been, preparing itself for this type of, eventualities, because once they started having their voices, they knew there would be some form of calamity in this form coming. So they have started preparing. There is a new credit card which they're using, and it has been recognized by some countries. It's being used in some countries and some banks. So the alternative have been found. Of course, because this situation now got worsened by unprecedented sanctions. Of course, it created a lot of discomfort, especially when major banks were switched off from the SWIFT. So it gave them a lot of problem. But nevertheless, their resilience in this, if you have to measure that no country ever in the world has received this type of numerous sanctions like Russia has. And so you can say, yes, at least so far, they've, stood their ground, and, there are a lot of things they are doing to make sure that the sanction does not, totally, push Russia to oblivion. And of course, everyday life, of course, initially there was shock. Initially, there were a lot of, fear that, okay, what will become, because especially when Russia has, gone into the international system already, most things are being relied upon from international transaction and, and supply. And when those things stop coming, how do they, fast track the import substitution policy, which they have started many years? Of course, it's slow. And because it's slow, because many people will say, why are you inventing wheel when there is a wheel already? And that has been the policy. Some of the researches and engineering institutions and all those things that they've been having during the Soviet Union, some of them were closed down, some of them were reformed and changed to something different. So now they have to start again to make sure that they are, at least sustaining in certain areas. So of course, there are problems with chips. Of course, most of the spare parts are coming from outside, and of course, there is logistics disruption. So these are things that are, affecting, gradually creeping into the system. But they are finding solution alternatives to it internally and externally. You have to also be aware that not all countries support the sanctions. So some of these countries are actually still providing the necessary things. China, for example, with the major partner now. So most of these things are still being supplied, through this channel. Everyday life, people are still, there enjoying themselves for traveling, even though there have been, instances of where restrictions is being, contemplated or being somehow silently being imposed on movement of people, mobility of people, and goods have been somehow being disrupted. But people are still finding their ways. And the neighboring countries, Turkey is also part of the countries that are also cooperating with Russia in getting alternatives to some of these things. So, so far, so good. People are looking for time, although it's tough in terms of psychologically, especially when thousands of foreign companies left the country or stopped their production or operation. Of course, it's giving them some concern, which they are finding solutions to.
Let's, because you are also chairman of NIDO in Russia, that's the Nigerians in Diaspora organization, and in that role, you come across, you interact with a lot of Nigerians of various cadres there. At the start of this conflict, quite a number of Nigerian students moved to Russia. Some stayed back there, others were offered admission, and then others used it as a resting point before moving on to other places, depending on that. And then, of course, there were other Nigerian professionals who were in Ukraine who also left. Now, what is the situation generally with Nigerians in Russia, in Moscow, where you are, but in Russia generally? How are they coping with all the things that you have described in this particular instance? Are many of them staying back, for example, or have you noticed that quite a number of them have left, probably for other countries, or come back home?
Thank you. Well, let me just make a correction. I'm not the chairman of Nigerians in Diaspora Russia. I'm the continental chairman of Nigeria in Diaspora Europe. That includes Russia, of course, and 23 other countries. I'm the chairman of
my apologies. My apologies. So you are in fact
yes.
in charge of a territory much bigger than I thought.
Yes, NIDO actually played a very formidable role during the crisis. We immediately used the network of Nigerians throughout Europe to rescue Nigerians, get them across to other neighboring countries, and took care of them. And of course, some of them still stayed back in Europe, and we still continue to do that. Particularly in Russia, there were no major exodus of foreign students or from Russia after the crisis in Ukraine, because Russia, especially most of the people who were here, believe that Russia could actually protect, there will not be direct strike on Russia. So the safety of life is secure. But the only issue was the issue of money transfer. We couldn't get, most of the people get support from home. We're finding it difficult to get money from their parents, from their sponsors, and also the other way around, even sending money from Russia to other countries also became a problem. So that is where the situation of things. As to, like I mentioned, there is no deficit of goods to the extent that people will feel it, unless if, of course, maybe some spare parts of imported goods. But they are getting it, just that it took some time for you to get it. And the other issue is the issue of prices. Of course, prices are stable from at least the initial, increase has somehow come down, because the foreign exchange has also come down, because most of the goods have been denominated in dollar exchange rate and all those stuff. So currently, people are trying to cope within that system of the hedging of the prices from the the foreign exchange. We can say maybe advantage that Russia will have even better than what it was before the crisis. So that is the situation of things. So there are no exodus of Nigerians. Even there are new intakes of students from Nigeria. Currently, there are people coming for scholarship. Russia offers scholarship to Nigerians, and there are some Nigerians coming here also to pay on their, for their institutions also as a private student. So there is no such disruption, at least as far as this current situation is.
Indeed. Professor of Economics and Chairman of Nigerians in Diaspora Organization Europe, Dr. Bashir Obashekola, thank you for your time and for your perspective this morning from the Russian capital, Moscow. It's been a pleasure speaking with you.
Thank you. It's a pleasure being here. Thank you so much.
The Russian independent news outlet Novaya Gazeta says it has been fined 350,000 rubles. That's about $5,700 for, quote, abusing media freedom. The fine was for an eyewitness report from the Russian-occupied Ukrainian city of Kherson, published in March, which Novaya Gazeta deleted from its website at the request of Russia's media watchdog. Its spokesperson, Nazida Pruzakova, says the outlet plans to appeal. Novaya Gazeta has been one of the leading lights of Russia's beleaguered independent media since the 1990s, and its editor-in-chief, Dmitry Muratov, was jointly awarded the 2021 Nobel Peace Prize for his efforts to safeguard freedom of expression. It suspended operations inside Russia in March after repeated warnings by the media watchdog about its coverage of Moscow's military campaign in Ukraine. Russia has made it a crime to publish reports about the conflict that differ from official accounts. And Russian authorities have raided the home of a former state TV journalist and detained her as part of a criminal investigation for allegedly spreading false information about the Russian armed forces. 44-year-old Marina Ozayenkova, who quit her job on Russian television in March after making an on-air protest against Moscow's war in Ukraine, was detained, according to her lawyer, Dmitry Zakotov. The case against the TV journalist was launched under a law that penalizes statements critical of the Russian military, and a conviction is punishable by up to 15 years in prison. In March, Ms. Ovsyannikova, then an editor at Russia's Channel 1 television, barged onto the set of of its flagship Crimea Time evening news program, holding a poster that read, "Stop the war, don't believe the propaganda, they are lying to you here." She was later charged with disparaging the Russian military and fined 30,000 rubles after quitting her job. Ms. Osaikova became somewhat of an activist, staging anti-war pickets and speaking out publicly against the conflict. We'll take a break, and when we come back, as usual, John McQuarrie will be joining us to unpack the business and economic stories that have come out from today. Plus, the Latvian defense minister called for more military support from the United States. Please stay with us. Welcome back. Ukraine's overseas creditors have backed its request for a 2-year freeze on payments of almost $20 billion in international bonds, a move that will allow it to avoid a debt default. Ukraine's Prime Minister Denis Shmyhal says the move will save the country almost $6 billion, helping stabilize its economy and strengthen its army. Ukraine's Minister of Infrastructure, Alexander Kubrakov, says a second commercial ship to arrive in a Ukrainian port since the start of Russia's invasion is docked in Chornomorsk and is ready to load grain. Russians are snapping up Western fashion and furniture this week as H&M and IKEA sell off the last of their inventory in Russia, moving forward with their exit from the country after it sent its troops into Ukraine. And the United Nations says it expects to see a big uptick in applications for ships to export Ukraine's grain after transit procedures were agreed upon by Russia, Ukraine, Turkey, and the United Nations. Frederick Kenny, interim UN coordinator at the Joint Coordination Center for the Black Sea Initiative, says the number of inbound vessels is expected to grow in the near future as more grain deals are made.
They'll be transiting northbound. Much of the work is quite technical, and it's being done at record speed, but without sacrificing the safety of the ships and the seafarers on board them. This is an encouraging sign for the way forward. The agreement is scheduled to last for 120 days, and we still have much work ahead of us to ensure that the implementation of the initiative translates into real results to address food insecurity around the globe and to stabilize global food markets. In terms of ships not being excited about going in, I think we have seen tremendous interest from ship owners in terms of their willingness to make this transit. But what they needed was the procedures so that they would know what to do. Now, we've released those, and we're expecting to see a big uptick in applications for transit. Indeed, we're aware that there are a number of empty grain vessels sitting at anchorage in Turkish anchorage areas, waiting to arrange the contracts, and once they have their deals arranged, they'll be transiting northbound. 370,000 metric tons is really the initial phase of this operation, I think is a very encouraging sign. And the goal of getting between 2 and 5 metric tons is achievable.
Just an update there. That first grain shipment that left Ukraine a couple of days ago has now finally been sold in Turkey. And that's after the original buyer in Lebanon refused to take it, citing a 5-month delay in the delivery. Let's talk about that with John McQuarrie, who joins me as promised. Morning, Ini.
Good morning.
Well, that's been sold, so the ship's gone and the grain is gone.
Yeah, the grain is gone, but I think there's some issues that come up with that also, because if the first buyer refused to take it, citing quality because of the 5 months delay and all of that, which of course is genuine, and then we also see that I think they're trying to bid down on the price using that, you know, because they were asking for renegotiation of it. Then what happens subsequently? These are already signed contracts and they're supposed to just be delivered.
Right.
But if the buyers keep saying, oh, we do not trust the quality because of the delay that has happened, and this is just for corn, which is also coming, because I thought that, I mean, because of the delay, I know that everybody will be scrambling, oh, I want first and everything. I don't think we saw this coming. So I guess is another area that Ukraine would have to look at to ensure that they have buyers who still trust that the product is in good quality, you know, before they can actually
ship it and incur the costs.
So it doesn't get stuck. I mean, because this was stocked since Sunday and just got sold, I think, yesterday.
Right.
And, you know, that's another delay. Days are being added
to it,
and affecting the quality that we are talking about also.
Absolutely. Now, Russia's annual consumer inflation has gone to 15.1%.
Yeah, but that's year on year. Yeah, obviously, that's a base year effect, because this time last year, everything was normal. And so at this time, things are not very normal. So because of that, you expect it, you know, at least to show that something is not normal in the economy. Right. But month on month, it actually tapered 0.4%. So Russia is still doing well in managing their economy. Their cost, I mean, even Turkey, we're talking about, their inflation is about 78%.
Okay,
you know?
So they're worse off even than Russia.
Yes, exactly. Not involved in the war, they don't have sanctions, and then they have that level of inflation compared to Russia that has all the sanctions on it and corporates living them, and yet their consumer price index is still tapering when you look at month on month. I mean, for year on year, it's very expected. Just like when we had the base year effect, looking at the pandemic, you know, a lot of things were not stable. So even though you see inflation go up, it's because last year everything was calm and now normal.
It isn't.
Exactly, yes.
All right, let's also look at Indian companies using more alternative currencies.
Yes, yes.
This was also expected.
This was also expected. You know, we've talked a lot about the possibility that the dollar may not be the dominant or the dominating currency after the war. This might actually be what we're seeing, because we see that Indian currency, they're using about 10 world currencies. It shows that in June, 30% of their payments were done in Chinese yuan, 28% were done in Hong Kong dollar. So, you know, things you never thought were
going to happen.
Exactly. And then you also have a quarter in euro. Then you have a sixth in UAE dirham. And even currencies like the Singapore dollar is being used. You know,
just to spread the leverage and the risk.
Yes, that's what they're doing. They say they want to make payments easy for the country. But at the end of the day, I think this will tell on the dominance of the dollar. And, you know, maybe soon countries will not be having their reserve in dollars anymore. I don't know.
At least not all of them.
No, at least not all of them. Not the BRICS are there. You know, the BRICS that Russia is working on.
India that we're talking about is in BRICS.
Is part of
Russia is in BRICS.
And then we
China is in BRICS.
And we have our own South Africa too. Also part of it. And they're trying to get the UAE and the Saudi Arabia to be part of it. Those are world oil giants. And if they succeed, and then they do have an alternative currency to the dollar, you know.
This might remove or reduce the U.S. leverage.
Yes, because the Western world would not want to hear that.
No, not really. Thank you, Ini. More of Ini and Ladi Williams on Business Morning right after this, and Business Incorporated later on.
Thank you for having me.
Latvia's defense minister has called for more frequent military training and assistance from the United States during the visit of the U.S. Defense Secretary to Riga. Speaking alongside Lloyd Austin, Artis Pabrikas said his country was, quote, a litmus test for the imperial ambitions of Russia and had relatively small military capabilities. On his part, Mr. Austin said that NATO's strengthening of its eastern flank during recent months was not about seeking confrontation with Russia. The U.S. is committed to sending Ukraine 5.3 billion euros in new fiscal and military aid. And let's take a quick look at the sports. Ukraine's President Volodymyr Zelensky has stripped 1992 Olympic figure skating champion Viktor Petrenko of a state grant for taking part in a Sochi show put on by former Russian ice dance star Tatiana Navka. Ukraine's National Olympic Committee had already condemned Petrenko for performing in the Scarlet Flower in the resort where Russia held the Winter Olympics in 2014, with the Ukrainian Figure Skating Federation also cancelling his membership and calling his behavior unacceptable as the military conflict with Russia continues. Mr. Petrenko had already stopped coaching Ukrainian Olympic hopefuls, and President Zelensky has now gone one further by taking away his state scholarship. And Russian national team track cycling coach Sergei Kapletev has said that the departure of 21-year-old Mikhail Yakovlev to represent Israel will be a blow for his country. Yakovlev won bronze in the curling event at the 2021 World Championships and was seen as among his country's brightest cycling prospects. The youngster has already received Israeli citizenship and informed Russian coaches of his intentions to swap nationality at international competitions. Mr. Yakovlev set a new world record when competing in the 200 meters flying trial at the Moscow Grand Prix. And that's how we end the program this morning. Thanks for being with us. My name is Ladi Akiri Duluale. There's an update on the world today at 5. Do watch out for that. But for now, do have a pleasant day ahead. Good morning.